Greetings and a warm welcome from me, astrologer Patrick Arundell, for the latest of my deep dive videos. Today I'm going to explore the journey of the quick moving Mercury, the winged messenger through the fiery and passionate sign of Aries, which begins on the 10th of March and goes on for 10 weeks through to the 15th of May. Now, Mercury usually speeds through each zodiac sign between about 18 and 21 days each time. So the extension is clear. It's due to a retrograde, which begins on April the 1st and goes on for 23 days. But I think it's absolutely critical that we don't look at individual planetary ingresses in isolation to what's going on in the overall zodiac. An example of this is that as this year began, Mercury was in a retrograde in a fire sign in Sagittarius. So that's going to be influential for the whole year, the fact that that was the case. And the sign of Sagittarius is about international trade. It can be about higher philosophies. It can also be about international borders and boundaries, but also Mercury is in detriment in the sign of Sagittarius. And also by the end of the year, when it's in retrograde in Sagittarius again, we need to be mindful of this when we're looking at Mercury going through Aries on this particular journey. And also Mercury is not only retrograde in fire signs this year. There is 10 days in August when it's retrograde in an earth sign. So it's vital that when I share this information with you or anyone else, that there is a high degree of accuracy in what we tell you. Also, Mercury is not a male planet. In terms of myth, Mercury was a male god. In terms of astrology, it's an androgynous influence. It's neither male or female. Because of the days that we're living through, and because of the importance that individuals have in their personal identity, it's critical that we're representing Mercury accurately in that regard. Now also, we can look at the archetypes of Mercury whizzing through Aries and that retrograde, but it's also important to look at the event chart when this process begins, because the most important aspect that Mercury will forge through this journey happens on the first day in a sextile to Pluto. And the reason for this is that Mercury in Aries and Pluto in Aquarius have not formed this relationship for over 220 years. That is the most important influence because it's going to provide a backdrop for the next 10 weeks. It's almost like having a baby and forgetting what the person's chart was simply because there were some aspects going on in the sky above them when they're 6 weeks old. We have to retain the perspective. So Mercury is in fire signs mainly this year, and in the case of Sagittarius where it's in detriment twice, but it actually is in an earth retrograde for 10 days in a sign that it's exalted and rules. And also we need to be conscious of the fact that Mercury is pretty close to the solar eclipse, which occurs on the 8th of April. It's not very, very close. That is Chiron. Chiron is exact with the solar eclipse. Mercury is not, but it's pretty close, and it's in a retrograde. We also have an inferior conjunction on the 11th of April. What is an inferior conjunction? Well, it just means that Mercury's in a retrograde at that time, so it means the Mercury's in between the Earth and the Sun. Very important. When Mercury's on the other side of the Sun, it's a superior conjunction, but it is a cazimi, the 11th of April. Hugely important. We can't just ignore that. That's very, very important. Now, of course, Mercury is going to be applying a couple of times to the node and also to Chiron. In fact, in the case of both, the exact conjunctions are the 19th and the 20th of March. And then we have a repetition on Chiron on the 15th of April. And then the last 10 days of April, pretty close to the North Node without actually becoming exact. So, if you're new to my channel, thank you so much for joining me. It's a real pleasure to have you with us. This is a community. If you have any thoughts, please share them. I interact with each comment. Also, if you're a returning visitor, your watches and views and comments and support are hugely important to me. If you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I'd be honoured if you did so now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. But I would like to say that what I share on this channel, I don't do it because of what's right for the algorithms. I do it for what's right for the astrology and what's going on in the world at a given time. I don't do it to pump me up, the individual. I do it because I love astrology. And I'm going to make you an offer now that's really going to help you if you're open to it. You can get from me your free natal chart. This will give you the exact planetary position of the Sun in terms of the degree and also the minutes and the house sign, and you can have it in Placidus or whole sign. The choice is yours. You can also discover exactly where your ascendant is and your moon, and all the angles they forge with other planets on the screen now. You can see the form, you can fill this in, and it will be emailed to you within seconds. And that's from my site. I don't need to take you to another site to use someone else's resource in order to aggrandize myself. That service is there for you. It's also important when we're thinking about Mercury to have a look at the two archetypes through the signs of Gemini and Virgo that it rules. So first up, Mercury. So this is very razzle-dazzle, isn't it? It's quick moving. It can be those fun conversations we have where we're just really teasing each other and joshing and seeing different angles. And that is something that I personally really enjoy. Just for clarity, I have Mercury in the third house. Mercury in the third house is very Gemini, but I also have it in Capricorn, but I also have it in a trine with Pluto. So analysis is very important to me. But through Gemini, we are talking about our connection to our immediate environment because the third house is our daily conditions. So that can be our community, our siblings, our neighbours. It can be our beliefs, our immediate beliefs, not necessarily our philosophical beliefs. That's the ninth house, very Sagittarius. It's much more to do with what immediately comes up. So it's very quick and speedy. And it's very dexterous because, of course, both signs, Gemini and Virgo, are mutable. And that's really important. But going back to this issue about Mercury's gender. So Mercury is an agent of exchange between the two genders, and therefore it's ubiquitous. It helps us to connect with one another, but perhaps even within ourselves. It can represent both genders at once. Speed and swiftness, particularly through Gemini, are very much part of its influence. But it's about how we think. It's about how we articulate things. It's talk and thought. And it can be to do with how we reason and weigh things up, very much Virgo, where we're looking at things in finer details and trying to discriminate more, particularly because Virgo's an earth sign, so we're trying to find out something from the process that has some kind of tangible value. Now through Gemini, it may be that we can just quickly communicate in a very charismatic way. But whether it is sending messages by email, by text message, instant message, old-fashioned snail post, whether it's chatting over the garden fence, whether it's picking up a newspaper and seeing what's going on, or checking out our phone or tablet to see what's going on in terms of current affairs. So it's very much in touch. the Gemini influence with the media, that's for sure. But Mercury is quite an inconstant influence in a way, so it can be quite changeable, and that's where perhaps the Gemini energy, so say, of being a little bit fey and fickle could be part of the equation. I'm not saying that, it's just it could be. Now in medicine, Mercury is associated with the nervous system, the brain, the respiratory system, and so very important as it's going through Aries that we're mindful of how that's going to play out. Also it influences the thyroid and how we see, obviously, and how we speak. That's critically important, and how we hear. So all those organs, see, speak, hear, Mercury. But it is traditionally known as cold and dry, but it's entering a hot host in the sign of Aries. And so that's something, again, we need to be mindful of. How is that going to play out? And whilst it's said to be the ruler of the third and the sixth houses, it's also said to have joy in the first house, which of course is where it's darted into. So that's really interesting. How is this joy going to play out? Because essentially Mercury is detached. It is about being more rational. It is a little bit unemotional, but you can't say the sign of Aries isn't emotional, because it's all or nothing. It's all in. And then, if things don't always flow, then the frustration, the anger, and the spark can start, the flame can start to come up. So Mercury in Aries, and people who have this in their natal horoscope, suggest that we're all going to have an opportunity to engage with information more rapidly. And if you are wanting to start something afresh, this is obviously going to be a critical time. But if you do find yourself coming into a situation where your point of view is something that you're deeply invested in and it's different from someone else's viewpoint, you may find yourself having a little bit of a tussle. And if you do encounter someone who has got Mercury in Aries in, say, the 9th house, so they may have a vast knowledge that they've accumulated over time, traveling and reading and through higher education, and they're going to want to dig in and defend that point of view. But Mercury in Aries could make us sharp-tongued and more quarrelsome, which is interesting. But the curiosity of this sign in this host means that our appetite to re-engage and go again is definitely going to be heightened. But I want to make this further point. We astrologers cannot look at planets going through particular zodiac signs or particular influences going on in the sky in complete isolation to what else is going on in the sky. Because if you do that, people will just get completely confused. And that's why it's very important to look at the natal event chart. So the natal event chart for this particular journey begins with Mercury forging a sensationally important link to Pluto, one that hasn't happened for 220 years. Mercury in Aries, Pluto in Aquarius. If we ignore that because we just want to talk about what the retrograde will be like from the 1st of April, we're missing the big picture. And that's vital. It's almost like having a baby and talking about what's going on in its life after it's 6 weeks old, forgetting what its birth chart was like. How can you do that? You're just crowding people with a heap of knowledge, but you're not giving them a perspective. And the perspective is that Venus glides in to replace Mercury in Pisces on Monday, but the ruler of the sign of Aries, Mars, continues to be in a very aggravating right angle to Uranus. So we have to be conscious that when this event begins, Mars is being conflicted in a very edgy, tense, and rather abrasive way. So what's that going to tell us about the likely journey over the next 10 weeks? It's potentially going to be quarrelsome. This is really, really important. So I'm going to share the event chart with you, but I'll also share with you the key aspects upcoming. But I will say to you this. If we think about where the planets are in the sky at the present time, with Venus's arrival in Pisces on Monday the 11th, we have a collective there, including one of the most important players of all, which is Saturn. If we just focus on Aries, we just focus on the retrograde, we are ignoring those other energies in the 12th zodiac sign. So as much as we may think that Mercury darting into Aries creates a big shift in itself, it's almost like a scout for the sun, which is going to arrive on the 20th with the new astrological year. Mercury's there in the long grass with its binoculars, checking out what's going on around, getting information and details which can then inform us all once the sun moves on that spring equinox. So at the moment, we're still going through a collective, highly psychological part of our whole existences, not least because of Saturn being, along with Neptune, in the sign of Pisces, the sign of reflection. The sign of Aries is about new beginnings. So we can think about new beginnings, but we must do so with an awareness of the emotion, the spiritual context of the sign of Pisces. So if you'd like to have a one-to-one with me, please check out my testimonials in the link beneath this video. I don't edit these, they just come out from my readings. And there's a lot of them, to be honest, which is very humbling. But please check those out. And then you can also see a link to the booking page within the store. And it would be a pleasure to work with you if so. So on the screen now, I'm showing the event chart with Mercury just into Aries, but forging that very important link to Pluto. Why is this important? Because Pluto is seeing a big structural change going on in society. At the moment, it seems like a lot of the bad guys have got back into a more authoritative level of influence. This is in terms of the geopolitics. And at the present time, it looks like the desire for a more peaceful, integrated world where we deal with some of the real problems that we should be facing, which is ecological problems, health problems, poverty, a lack of human contentment. Also, what are we going to do about AI, robotics, automation, because it's going to have a huge impact on us. A lot of people's cost of accommodation is so high, it makes almost surviving a real challenge at every level. And I feel what Mercury does in that angle to Pluto is we are going to start to see some sparks. And there's going to be some people who start to find their voices. Voices that is going to surprise who those people are. So for example, we've seen the president of the Czech Republic taking a hugely influential lead role in European relationships. We've seen Macron step forwards, quite a controversial person, I think you would agree, but he is seeing a big picture. He's seeing a big picture that's not dependent on the United States in terms of European security. And he's making some very shrewd points which push back at a narrative of the far right in America, but also the far right in Russia. And it takes courage. And that compulsion to speak out when it's not necessarily the easiest message to deliver is something we're going to see a lot more of over this next 10 weeks, but also throughout 2024. But because Mercury is going to burn up in these fire signs, all but those 10 days, it's not necessarily going to give us an outcome that is going to be long lasting. It's more a lot of debate. There's going to be a lot of frustration. We're going to see a lot of tussles for power around ideas. That's what year 2024 is about. So having Mercury in that sextile to Pluto is fantastically influential, because we are going to see some voices come through that go beyond the status quo, go beyond the established order. And it may not be obvious to us to begin with, It could be, for example, some very famous people speaking out against AI. Some people that may not necessarily be our cup of tea, depending again on how we view the world. The other thing with this event chart is that Mercury is just shrugging off its conjunction to Neptune. Now, someone told me that an astrologer said that Mercury linked to Neptune in Pisces like it had never done in our lifetimes. I absolutely roared at that. Mercury linked to Neptune at the end of March 2023. As I say, important that facts are right. So Mercury's shrugging off that link to Neptune last week that I felt saw a lot of distortion. And you may have seen that distortion as well. You may have felt quite low in physical vitality and mood, because in a way, the idealism that can come from Mercury, and even the spiritual idealism of Neptune, is being diminuted in that combination. Now, if you were lucky enough to chill out last week, listen to music, paint, indulge your interest in photography or film, watch some old black and white movies and kick back, you really, really nailed it. But I think for the rest of us, it felt very dislocating, very disorientating, very confusing. And concurrent to that, Mars and Uranus are in a mighty argument which peaked on Saturday. And that argument overlays the beginning of Mercury's journey through Aries. And that's why I feel the next 10 weeks will be quarrelsome for sure, because it's part of the natal chart. Natal charts is what it's all about, not individual aspects. Now, in March, the third week of March sees Mercury conjunct the North Node and also Chiron. Now it's exact across the 19th and the 20th. Important because Mercury can help us to think about things and also talk about things. But Chiron, let's think about Chiron, the wound we can never heal. And Chiron's our weak point. Well, let me tell you something. Chiron is your and my greatest strength. But where it's a weak point is that we may not get at a personal level the acknowledgement and support for those strengths, even though it is what defines us. So for example, if someone's got Chiron in the 12th house, they will be so empathetic, they will be so sensorily skilled, so atmospherically clever. But because it's the 12th house and because of their own perhaps insecurities or sensitivities, it may be difficult for them to step into the centre stage. But I say only may, because some people have very strong 12th house Chiron positions because it's about the natal birth chart. So if they got Pluto that's bolstering Chiron, it's going to give them extra strength. So although the myth is it's the wound you can never heal, Chiron was a trainer. He was an elite trainer of people. And yes, he did have the arrow go into his foot that wouldn't heal, but then he was released from his burden and set free in the heavens. It's important to know these things if we're talking to people about Chiron. So Mercury applying to Chiron is how we think about the area of life, and we need to know not just what sign it's in, but what house it's in and what relationships it forges to other planets. That's an area that we could think and talk about some more. We won't necessarily completely get to grips with it because it can be so profound, but it can be our greatest strength where Chiron is in our chart. It's at a personal level that we can feel the pain. April the 11th, Mercury, GEMINI. It's an inferior conjunction. That means Mercury's in between the Sun and Earth. This obviously sees the power of the Sun ramp up the energy of Mercury. But because Mercury is retrograde, it's an interesting one, this, because Mercury in some ways wants to achieve something in the sign of Aries to do with initiation, starting new ideas, standing up for the things we feel passionate about because of the fire. But it's also important to understand that the Sun's energy is beginning afresh too. So even if we are trying some things, maybe pausing, adjusting, going again, the sun is supportive, but I don't feel on this particular inferior conjunction it is such a strong one. What is hugely important is on April the 8th, because the solar eclipse is in a conjunction with Chiron. So that's clearly a hugely important event whilst Mercury is retrograde. And then we have on the 15th of April, Mercury does combine with Chiron once more. We're still having that debate. We're having that debate all our lives. We're not just going to have the debate because Mercury applies to Chiron. Chiron is a regular issue in our lives every single day. We're just going to think and talk about it more if we choose, because we might not to. It depends on what we do as individuals. It's not a collective influence per se, it's what we choose. Some people don't want to look at their hurt. They don't want to look at their pain. Not everybody wants to work at their personal development. There are no rules. No one should tell you what the rules are. And then the last 10 days of Mercury, there is a conjunction with the North Node. Not exact, they're in touch. So again, the North Node in the sign of Aries is where we're collectively heading through to the middle of January next year, when it inverts into the sign of Pisces. So again, there could be a big conversation about where we're heading as a collective, because the solar eclipse on the 8th is really urging us all to take our individuality a lot more seriously, because that's one of the key things of Aries energy. Some people will say, oh, well, Aries people, they pile into situations, lose interest, pick up the ball or the jumper and stomp off. That's simply not fair. And do you know why? Because every single one of us has Aries in our natal chart through the prism of the ascendant. So let's take a flavour of what we can expect over these next 10 weeks for each of the 12 signs. Look at your ascendant, look at your sun. If you choose to, you can look at your moon as well. But most of all, it's important to understand how this works. Whether it's the ascendant or the sun, whatever degree you've got, it always assumes with these videos on YouTube that the sun or the ascendant is from 0 degrees of each sign. So it's a bit of a simple concept, and it won't always fit for each of us all of the time. It can't. The only way you can do that is by engaging with your natal chart, which you can download for free, as I've shared to you, from my site. You can also get your free daily written horoscope from Aries through to Pisces fired to your device each morning, something that I've written for nearly 30 years. That takes real dedication in addition to doing these videos. You can also get your weekly written forecast, your monthly written forecast, your yearly written forecast. So much content. You can check out all my tarot information on my website as well, patrickarundell.com. Please engage with me the way you would like. I'm going to be changing a few things going forwards, but please don't ever underestimate the dedication, commitment, passion and knowledge that I possess. But I don't do it for me, I do it for the astrology, because I love astrology. So Aries, obviously Mercury nipping into your sign could mean that if you've had an idea percolating on the back burner, this is going to be your opportunity to really get it moving. But guess what? It might not play out exactly as you would like. Why is that? It's not just because of that retrograde period, it's also because of the shadow periods that pre and post date the actual event itself. But you do have that incredibly important solar eclipse coming within this event on the 8th of April. And that's linking with Chiron. So you may be thinking a lot about your identity, but at the present time, you're still also downloading and dealing with some stuff from your past because of all that 12th house energy in the sign of Pisces. So what I would say to you is, if you do have some ideas over the next 10 weeks, and not all of them play out exactly as you intend or expect at the outset, be completely philosophical about it, because when you get to the end of this period, it will all fall into place in a much more appropriate way, because maybe there's information that you're about to discover that you're not aware of as you set your intentions. So in other words, if you really have a flame of desire about something, just be aware that it may alter along the journey, and that is absolutely fine. But it's vital that you're looking at the more psychological dimension of your situation. In other words, what's your motivation for trying this new idea? Is it coming from a desire to gain traction that you feel you're lacking at the moment? Has something come to a natural close? That would be completely and totally understandable. If that's the case, you're going to be firing forward. Taurus, the next 10 weeks I think are going to be particularly interesting for you, but only if there's part of you that, because obviously the fact that Chiron, the North Node, Mercury retrograde and the solar eclipse are all going to occur in your 12th house, it doesn't mean to say that's where Chiron and the North Node are in your natal chart. But let's just think in terms of the theme of your sign. You are being urged, if you have had a bit of a reluctance in the past, to look at the more tender parts of life, yourself, hurts, vulnerabilities, fears, the past, rejections. If all these areas have been something that you have been a little bit resistant to grappling with, this is your enormous opportunity. And it is an opportunity. But there also could be revelations coming your way that may not necessarily be easy, because 12th house energy and the fire of Aries could mean that someone's going to present a viewpoint or perspective to you that you find quite hard to digest. Because the 12th house in traditional astrology is about hidden enemies, but it's also about where we may retreat. It may be where we want to recuperate. It could be where we might want to withdraw. So I feel right through to when you have that conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus on the 21st of April, and remember that begins to shape up by the end of March. That they start to come together within 3 degrees within the end of March. But by the time you get to the 21st of April, you're going to be much more conscious of what's exciting you as an individual. But I think the preparatory work for you does, I sense, depend on how much you're open to looking at that shadow side of your nature. But perhaps if you feel largely intact, the shadow side of some of the people that you're involved with, whether it is in terms of friendships, colleagues, who you're employed by, if you feel very secure and honoured and appreciated, it may pass off relatively uneventfully. But if you're in a situation where you're not quite sure how things are going to go at the present time, the best way to deal with this is actually embrace it. And with Pluto in the 10th house of your situation, arc into Mercury at the start of the journey, you can use your authority to drive this. You can use your wisdom and knowledge, Pluto in the 10th house. And sometimes the wisdom and knowledge comes from humility. It comes from knowing when we perhaps do need to shift and learn and evolve, even if, like the sign of Taurus, you do have a preference for stability, continuity, certain set routines, but something is going to be shifting. And I feel that there may be some things that are going to make way, that you're going to make a conscious decision not to hold on to. It may be painful, but it may actually serve your greater good. You may also find yourself becoming incredibly excited about any form of healing, booking up loads of treatments. If you've never been an advocate of therapeutic massage or chiropractic or counselling, these are the type of things that really can excite you over this next 10-week period. Gemini, this is a particularly important event because it involves your ruler, of course, and it involves your 11th house. But as the process begins, Mercury in your sign is forging a fantastic link to Pluto in house 9. Is there someone that you're connecting with at the present time that you're finding to be hugely inspirational? It could be a life coach, it could be a lecturer, it could be a professional such as an accountant or a solicitor, a barrister. Somebody with a huge amount of experience is feeding into how you're feeling about your future, or something you're joining in with. It could be a philosophy that you're becoming much more aware of. It could be knowledge that you're downloading. It could be through travel. But something really phenomenally powerful is coming through the energy of Pluto in Aquarius, feeding into your ruler, setting you alight with possibilities. So as Mercury goes through your 11th house, the 11th house is about your future. It's about your network. It can be about fortune, but of course it can be about your friendships, your social interactions, but it's about your higher motivation. So the 10th house, where that gathering of energy is in Pisces at the moment, it's very much more about the worldly connection, how you're perceived, your position, your connection to the world. Can be about work and goals and ambitions. The 11th house, much more idealistic. So there's going to be some big energy sweeping into your situation over the next 10 weeks. Some new friends, some new associates, but some people may make way. And one of the reasons that they're going to make way is Pluto, because Pluto is connecting you to a different way of viewing life, viewing yourself, viewing your acolytes. And it's not going to change. You get it through to the 2nd of September, moves back into Capricorn through till the 18th of November. So that could be a period when some financial issues require some further clarification. But once it moves back into Aquarius, it's going to be there for the long term, as you know. But that's the inspirer in your situation, and it's triggering your ruler in such a positive way. Now, the 11th house can also be to do with those longer term plans. One of the things that I think is important at this present time is not to feel that even if you're invested in something that you're enjoying, that you have no opportunity to be adaptive and flexible, because that's when you start to feel trapped and choked off and want to escape. So if you have got connections that you enjoy, they need to be fluid a little bit. They need to represent that part of you that can connect when it suits and spin out when it suits as well. But a lot of change going around for you at the present time. But I would say this is an incredibly exciting opportunity for you, even if there are going to be stumbles and changes along the way. And maybe is one of your friends, particularly through the auspices of that solar eclipse, is going to turn out to be a real ace support for you, not just through this next 10 weeks, but for many moons to come. So Cancer, you have that huge gathering of energy in House 9, which is about exploration, independence, travel, higher education, and it's going to be augmented by the gorgeous Venus from Monday. What's not to like? Well, it's just that Mars and Uranus are in that very agitated relationship as Mercury makes its way into the sign of Aries. So for you, Mars is in the part of your situation to do with what you share, where you're most invested, and Uranus is in a very free-spirited part of your chart, the 11th house. The 11th house likes to be very unfettered. It certainly doesn't like to be told what to do. It can be about your future. So there could be some politics around a situation where who does or contributes what, maybe in terms of your longer term plan around a group situation, if you don't really feel validated or appreciated, or is it around a romantic situation? So then we go back to that 9th house energy. That's all about feeling free. So there is some politics with Mars and Uranus, but the need to be free, but download information, 9th house. So that could mean dialogue, new knowledge can be very helpful. Mercury then zips into your 10th house. What's that about? Well, the 10th house links with Pluto in the 8th. So if you are thinking about finances, but need to find a new paradigm to work for you, Pluto linking with Mercury could be about applying for a new job, particularly if you've been yearning for a change with that 9th house energy, feeling a bit restless. A change is as good as a rest. Being more spontaneous, a job that's to do with travel or to do with philosophy or to do with education, or taking a course of higher education in order to improve your professional situation. Because the professional situation comes under the celestial spotlight in a big way as Mercury makes its way through the sign of Aries, and of course particularly on the back of that solar eclipse. That solar eclipse is pouring energy into the next 6 months, but Mercury's in retrograde. So Mercury retrograde from the 1st of April, is that saying to you something you didn't complete, perhaps when you were younger? Perhaps you got particular demands in your life that meant you had to deal with those rather than continuing to learn. So that would be a great opportunity to learn, but learn skills that are good for your career, because the 10th house, which is where that solar eclipse occurs for you, is about your role in life. It's about your ambitions, but it's where you want to showcase your authority. So if you're feeling restless, a change of theme or a change of dynamics in your professional situation is possible. But of course, it is also possible that because of all the changes going on around employment, things could get a bit bumpy, that things may not necessarily be consistent. There may be challenges that are going to come up. But the great news is that you've got all this information in order to guide you. And I feel the more that you're informed, whether it's to make progress in your situation in terms of professionally now, or in terms of what you do voluntarily, or how you make a contribution as a leader in your family life or your community, you've got this extra information here to help guide you. But with Mercury going through the retrograde, it is true that there are likely going to be some roadblocks along the way, but it's not roadblocks that you can't learn from and negotiate, because at the end of the process, by the 15th of May, I think you're going to be so much clearer about where you really want to drive forwards with passion and conviction, and receive recognition for what makes you so special. So Leo, for you, Mercury darting into your sister fire sign of Aries is really exciting, because the 9th house is where we want to lively things up. So whether it is through travel, whether it is through a new approach in your thinking, the chances are, because of the retrograde, just like everyone else, there could be some variable speeds and things may not actually completely turn out as you anticipate at the outcome. But because there's such a supporting cast in terms of the solar eclipse, in terms of the Mercury cazimi, you have an opportunity to rethink something in terms of the knowledge base that you are taking your life forwards with, that could be really, really exciting for you, especially if you are yearning for some kind of big alteration. But equally, of course, Mercury retrograde can lead to glitches, and the 9th house, which it moves into, can be to do with contracts, can be to do with legal matters. So those are the areas that you would want to take a little bit more care around. But the cast of characters in your 8th house, which is augmented by Venus from Monday, that's very much about where you're most invested. If you're invested in a situation which isn't working for you, Mercury is an agent for change. It's going to be provocative. Once the sun moves on the 20th of March, the desire to shake things up and perhaps escape from something that isn't working, because the 8th house can be ends as well as beginnings, could become quite compelling, and things may initially start to move at quite a pace. But that part of you that does have an appreciation of continuity may be something you will have to challenge about yourself. It may be the point in time when learning afresh, looking at things in a different way, travel, relocation, new skills, all these things are going to be at the heart of what this Mercury transit is about for you. Now, Virgo, of course, for you, Mercury is your ruler. So moving into the 8th house, what's the 8th house about? The 8th house is about shared resources. It can be about where we bank, it can be to do with our investments, our pensions. It could be to do with a business matter. If you're an entrepreneurial person and you're wanting to develop a new idea, it may be that some kind of partnership could be part of your equation because of Venus just moving into your seventh. And also because Pluto is being very provocative about your work. If you are bored and have been bored for some while with your work, it's not stimulating you enough. And you know a change may be good in some ways, but there may be other reasons why staying as you are can be attractive too. So the link between Pluto and Mercury can give you an amazing ability to penetrate down into the possible variables that you're given, whether it is about the value in a product, an investment product, whether it's how you can make a property matter work out for you. If there is a market you're interested in, you can analyze it with aplomb. But I think how you interact with others is going to be important. But if the relationship part of your situation is something that's in transition because of Saturn being in the seventh house, then Pluto moving into the eighth to be joined by the Sun, the solar eclipse, that could point towards some big shifts, some big changes in your situation. And the eighth house isn't necessarily an easy place for these things to happen. But what Mercury in the eighth house gives you is a very penetrative way of using your natural powers of observation and discrimination, but really punching down into things in an even more detailed way. So Libra, you could start this whole process off with a very big conversation, because with Pluto angling to Mercury, if there's something that you feel you want to get off your chest when it comes to how other people view you, others could be surprised at the venomance of the way you get that point of view across. It can be with real conviction. And I think that's actually a really good thing, because the gathering of energy, including from Monday of Venus in your sixth house, it has been quite the grind in some ways since 212 with Neptune there. Your sacrificing nature has been great, but since last March, the sheer demands physically and mentally and structurally on your situation may have become a lot more. Maybe this is just about the domestic load. So if you're the person who feels that they're keeping it all together, spinning all those proverbial plates, and other people quite happy sitting, watching telly on their devices, not really pitching in, it's all down to those boundaries again. So Mercury in the seventh house is really good, because in the sixth it can be very brittle. And then last week in that conjunction with Neptune, oh my word, you may have felt so washed out, but you can get your fire back about setting those boundaries. And because you always knew, because you had the first of the two Aries eclipses last year, and of course the second new moon last year, you always knew that this was going to be a very important year for your relationships. And that solar eclipse, particularly that it's conjoining or conjunct with Chiron, if you are someone who tends to be a little bit too easygoing, maybe a bit too agreeable, finds it difficult to say no, doesn't like to rock the boat, likes to keep the peace, that's all very well. But if you're becoming invisible to other people, this Mercury retrograde gives you the chance to rethink, but it also gives you the chance to reshape other people's perception of you. But you're going to have to keep at it. I feel this is going to be an intense 10-week period, but it's a 10-week period which holds so much promise, as long as you're clear about what you want in relationships, what you're prepared to give, but also what you will not accept. Scorpio, Mercury moving into the sign of Aries is interesting, because like your sign, traditionally, Aries is ruled by Mars. So Mercury moving here gives you a little bit more robustness, particularly around the detail of things, the sixth house. In fact, it's a kind of a bit of a Virgoan transition for you. But it does mean if you've got any appointments lined up, whether routine stuff with the dentist, the annual analysis in terms of blood pressure and all that good stuff, there most certainly could be some rearrangements in the works, because we know with Mercury retrograde that can happen. But also this is a period of real opportunity for you, and because Pluto is giving you, and it has given you in 11 weeks last year and since the 21st of January this year, a much deeper appreciation of what's really important in your life at an emotional level. Pluto's link to Mercury suggests if you need to articulate your feelings, Pluto, in a precise way, Mercury will help you to do that. But the retrograde, of course, could mean that the little details that may not be particularly important to you but are important to somebody else could be the things that catch you out in the next 10 weeks. So in other words, it's going to be very, very important to have a 2020 vision. Sometimes we can find those everyday matters that we have to attend to as dull as the proverbial ditch water. But if you can kind of find ways to be enthusiastic about it, that's all well and good. And you do have that rocking tribe in the 5th house of your situation, which is going to be augmented by Venus from Monday, and maybe Mercury moving into the 6th house, the solar eclipse, Chiron and the North Node, the Mercury Cazimi, they all give you an opportunity. If you want to get fitter, that can be a great way to get to know somebody new, potentially in a more romantic dimension as well, through the gym, through the fitness club, through walking the dog, and so forth and so on. So some of those details are going to be important. There may be some frustrating irritations. Mercury in the 6th house can be a brittle energy, so it's possible at times you could feel a bit irritable at times. But the great thing about 6th house energy is we can deal with the minutiae. The downside of the 6th house is we find the big picture harder to comprehend. Stay with the big picture, but keep an eagle eye on the micro picture too. So Sagittarius, Mercury moving into your sister fire sign of Aries is so exciting, but you still have that cluster of energy in house 4. So if there was some kind of gathering with people that you're very, very close to, particularly family members, over the next few weeks, that would be really lovely. That would be a great way to make Mercury in the 5th house work for you, which is very sociable. I don't really think it's going to be until the sun moves on the 20th that you're going to start to feel like engaging with other people more. At the moment, it is a very tender phase, particularly with Venus arriving on Monday. And so if you're up for beautifying your home, beautifying your garden, if you're in the southern hemisphere, Venus moving into the 4th house is all good for that. But Saturn's there, so maybe things are not quite as you want at home. There may be some challenges or some elements of your home life that are not quite as settled as you would like. But Mercury going into the 5th is certainly exciting because it's more outgoing. Mercury in the 4th is really tough. And last week, in that most dampening conjunction with Neptune, you may have really, really felt, almost like a damp squib. But you're moving into an area where you can regain your fire, your passion, and any interests and creativity you've got, you can start to showcase them. And because of the Piscean influence, if you're a hobbyist and you like to make things at home, or you play music, or you cook, you're going to be in top form over the next few weeks. Capricorn, for you, Mercury moving into the 4th house has some potential challenges because the 4th house is our emotion. Mercury doesn't thrive in the 4th house, which is kind of Cancerian feel. It's a bit inward. The water stops the clarity of Mercury working so well, but you do have the fire of Aries, which is good. So there could be some intense discussions around home, family and emotion over the next 10 weeks. Also about where you live, how you live there and who. Because Venus is moving into the 3rd house, your diplomacy will be important, but that doesn't mean to say you can't be honest. And Saturn in the 3rd house means that if you do have something important to say, you can say it, but it's important to also understand the tone. But Mercury moving into the 4th house could see you thinking a lot about your heritage in terms of the family evolution. You could find yourself checking out people you've not been in touch with for some while. If you're really interested in ancestry, that could be something that really grips you. But if you are looking to buy and sell or move on the rental front, obviously with Mercury moving into the fourth house and the solar eclipse, the chances are you will get there in the end, but it could take longer than you hope, and there could be some niggles along the way. So whether you're hoping for a contractor to come and help you at home, you've got an agent or a relator listing your property, obviously Mercury retrograde is not the best of times to try to do these kind of transactions. But it doesn't mean to say that you should definitely not do them, because your circumstances may mean that you feel you have less choice. And sometimes, we can still make progress even with the retrograde and the shadow periods. It's all about the most ideal time, but sometimes life's not like that. Sometimes it is what it is. And if, for example, a tenancy is coming to an end, or you've sold your property and you have to leave by a set date, you may have to be flexible whether you like it or not. Aquarius, Mercury moving into the sign of Aries is absolutely terrific, particularly because Pluto in your sign angles to it in such a sharp way. So the passion that you're feeling can be articulated, showcased in a very, very potent manner. A case of what you mean is what you say, but you're going to be expressing things that people didn't really know that you had sentiments around. So there's going to be a lot more fire coming across in terms of pumping across your viewpoint. Now, of course, with Venus moving on Monday into Pisces, that can be very good for finance. But Saturn is there as well. So maybe if there has been a contraction around a mode of income that has been reliable in the past, you've got to do a rethink. Now, the third house is obviously about learning, but it can be about teaching. Do you have skills that you can share with others? Because the next 10 weeks is the time to bring them out, dust them down, and modify them perhaps to the world and the situation that you now find yourself in, and reach new people with those ideas. So the retrograde for you could actually be great if you reprise knowledge that you've already got, but you hadn't shared for someone or ever shared before. You didn't necessarily think it was appropriate. Well, Pluto is giving you so much more conviction from here on in. So when you go to share that information, will it be a straight line? No. You may remodel it in some way. There may be some adaptations. There may be some resistances you encounter. But with the solar eclipse on the 8th, in such a potent relationship with Chiron over the next 6 months, if you've got a message that is really important for others, get it out there. There could also be some kind of movement from someone who was close to you, an old friend, neighbour, sibling, to try to reconnect with you. And you may have a really significant, big decision to make about exactly what to do. So Pisces, for you, Mercury moves into your second house, which is about how you feel about yourself, your worth, your values, your money, your everyday money. But Venus is just pitching up on your doorstep on Monday with her beautiful embroidered case, and saying, "Hi honey, let me in." So she steps into your life, and it's very much about you, the individual. So if you can enamor in some ways your personal identity and your sense of attractiveness and appeal, that's going to be good for your bank balance. So in other words, if you strut your stuff and really believe it, good things are going to be coming your way. What's the catch? Well, Mars is in the 12th, in that quarrel with Uranus in the 3rd. Is there an old situation which is still resonating around you? It's possible. There could be some stress in the background. Someone from your past being a bit two-faced, a bit malicious. Social media could be something that's a little bit undermining. So that could be something that feeds into this. But with Pluto in the 12th house, if you do your research deeply, but also you're conscious of how you're shifting at the very root of your soul, that can guide you to the next way that you're actually going to work with resources, but also work with your sense of self-value. But I think at the present time, it is very exciting about your personal identity, but someone around you is very jealous of you at the present time, I feel, Pisces, and it's absolutely vital that you keep your sense of conviction. And if you are looking to buy something, get into some kind of payment plan, just be aware of how you would service that if your current situation did change, not just with the retrograde, but also with the solar eclipse in your second house. So if there's something you're really working towards that's a big target, do have some contingencies planned if for whatever reason there was some kind of alteration. But at the moment, if you put your personality power, creativity, talent and flair at the heart of what you're trying to do, you ultimately are going to gain greater rewards, but most of all feel more enriched as a human being within yourself. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me. Please do check out your weekly horoscopes. I've reformatted it. I've always done weekly horoscopes. I've done them for many years, but I've reformatted them. I'm including a chart wheel in each one, also doing an overview for the week. So it's a proper grown-up presentation for you. Please check those out by clicking on the link beneath this video. And remember, if you want your free natal horoscope, you can download that and get that in your email in seconds. If you want to get your free daily written horoscope, please do subscribe for that. If you want to have a one-to-one with me, it would be an honor. Please check out my testimonials beneath this video. But for now, all the best with Mercury making its journey into the exciting fire sign of Aries.